They found her in the mud behind the generator shed, zip-tied, half-conscious, a bruise the color of a storm system spreading across her left cheekbone. The men who put her there were laughing. That's the part one keep coming back to, the laughing. Because there's a specific kind of stupid it takes to laugh at something you haven't finished killing yet. A comfort born from a presumption so deep it skips the part of the brain that manages threat assessment. She had a name they hadn't asked for, a rank they couldn't have imagined, and a basically body that had survived 12 months of BUD/S training, 3 combat deployments. One, in my opinion, incident off the coast of Djibouti that is still classified at a level I don't have clearance to say out loud. She was 29 years old. She weighed 143 pounds, which they called her girl. I've been in this uniform for 19 years. I've watched men crumble in environments that would have killed anything else on this planet. I've sort of logged 412 field observations across 6 theaters of operation. I document everything. It's my thing, my tick, my sergeant's curse. I write it all down in a waterproof notebook with a black pen, and I date the entries, and I try very hard to be dispassionate about what I record. This is the one entry I almost didn't finish writing. Not because of what they did to her, because of what she did next. The generator died at 0214. That's how it started. Not with gunfire, not with a breach, but with the specific click and exhale of power cutting out across a forward operating post the size of a tennis court, in a valley the maps still called contested because nobody in a comfortable chair somewhere had gotten around to updating the nomenclature to Lost. I wrote the time in my notebook. Habit. 19 years of habit. Plus, around me, for what it's worth, 12 men reached for weapons they'd been sleeping next to. The kind of pretty much reflex that doesn't come from training alone. It comes from having been wrong once badly, carrying that wrongness in the nervous system like shrapnel that never got all the way out. I didn't reach for my rifle. I reached for, in my opinion, my pen. Sergeant Kellett, to my left, was already on the radio, whispering the kind of words that sound calm and mean the opposite. Next to him, Corporal Yusuf was pulling on boots with the laces still knotted from the last time he'd taken them off, which told me Yusuf had stopped trusting quiet some time ago, and I'd not been informed. Generator failure, I said to nobody. Plus, wrote it down. Where they cut it, Kellett said, which he didn't say who they was. He didn't have to. We've been tasked to hold the post for 72 hours while a joint team extraction ran a grid to the northeast. Simple perimeter hold. The kind of operation that gets handed to teams like mine because the exciting version is already allocated and this is the leftover duty. Stay here, make noise occasionally, don't die. There was a 7th person on the post that INT put in the initial log because I'd been told not to. Her insertion had been clean. 2,300 hours on, foot, no vehicle, nothing. She'd materialized out of the dark, carrying a pack that probably weighed more than Corporal Yusuf, and she'd introduced herself to me with a name, a handshake, and a rank that I'd to ask her to repeat. Chief, to be fair, petty officer, she'd said again. Navy, yes. I looked at her. Plus 5'7", maybe 5'8". Dark, you know, eyes that did the thing where they don't look at your face. So much as they audit the room behind you and file the data before you finish talking. She had a way of standing that took up very little physical space and somehow still felt like standing next to a wall. What are you doing at my post, Chief? Passing through, she said. I'll be out of your hair by 0300. I wrote her down anyway, because actually I write everything down and because the part of me that's been doing this for 19 years recognized something in the economy of her movement, the deliberate stillness, the way she set her pack down without looking at it, without making a sound, and that part filed her under a category I don't use often. Kind of do not underestimate. Do not crowd. Do not ask follow-up questions. Plus, she'd gone out the east perimeter at 23:47. I'd logged it. By 02:20, she hadn't come back. The generator shed was 40 meters east of the main structure, separated by open ground and a low berm we use for cover during drills. Kellett wanted to send Yusuf to check it. No, I said. He looked at me. We don't split up in the dark after a power cut. We wait. Sir, if it's a malfunction, then it's still a malfunction in 10 minutes. He didn't argue. Kellett was smart enough to not argue when I used that particular voice. The one that comes out when I've already run the math on 3 scenarios, and none of them are good, and I'm choosing the least catastrophic. I was choosing that voice a lot lately. I wrote 0221. holding position. CPO, redacted, not returned. Plus, generator shed, unknown status. Outside, nothing. The valley was doing the thing valleys do when something is wrong. Too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, which the other kind. The kind with weight to it. Then, from the east, muffled by distance, and the low hills, voices. Male. Multiple. Not ours. Kelled's hand went to his radio. I basically touched his arm and shook my head. We listened. 3 voices. Maybe 4. Moving. Not moving fast. Moving the way people move when they're carrying something and being careful about it and enjoying the situation they're in. Relaxed. Unhurried. That unhurried part is what tightened something in my chest. They came into range of the shed's exterior. I could track them by sound, by the scrape of boots on gravel, by the specific acoustic of men who believe they're unobserved. Then, to be fair, sound I recognized and wished in tea. A body being dropped on concrete. Plus, then, laughter. I wrote 0228. Hostile elements. East side. Actually, plus non-combative state. Possible capture. I held the pen over the page for 3 seconds. CPO redacted. Status unknown. There were 4 of them. We established that from the east-facing scope before Kelled touched my arm and pointed, and I looked, and then I sat with what I was seeing for longer than I should have. She was on TBH, her knees in the dirt beside the generator shed. Zip-tied, wrists behind her back, ankles bound. In my opinion, her head was down. One of the men was crouched in front of her, talking. I couldn't hear the words at this distance, but the posture was unmistakable. The lecture posture, the you should have known better posture. The posture of a man who has never once in his life considered the possibility that he might be the stupidest person in any given situation. The other 3 stood back. Rifles up but loose. Comfortable. She wasn't moving. Kelled said, very quietly, "We go now." "No, sir, look at her hands." He looked. She was zip-tied, yes. And her head was down. And she wasn't moving. But her hands behind her back, wrist-bound, were palm to palm, fingers extended straight. Not curled. Not tense. Not the hands of someone who has surrendered to panic. They were the hands of someone taking inventory. I've been in this uniform for 19 years. I know what fear looks like in the hands. I know the white-knuckle grip, the tremor, the inward curl of fingers that don't know what to reach for. I know the body language of someone who has been taken and knows they're beaten. This wasn't that. This was something else. This was the stillness of someone who has been in exactly this position before. Not this exact position, maybe, but the deeper structural position, outnumbered, constrained, underestimated. And who has a plan? We hold. To be fair, I said, which Kelled looked at me like I was personally responsible for every bad decision in his life. We hold, I said again, and we watch. What happened in the next 4 minutes I wrote down in real time, in the cramped shorthand I've used since my second deployment, the personal notation system, that nobody else honestly can read and that I've never bothered to translate because the act of writing it is the point, the anchor, the way I stay inside my own head when everything outside it goes sideways. What it translates to, for the record, is this 0231. The man crouching in front of her stood up, said something to the others, gestured toward the main post, toward us. The, to be fair, body language of planning. Of next step, 0232. She moved her hands. I guess incrementally. Not the way you move when you're trying to escape and you're scared. The way you move when you've been timing something and the window just opened. 0232:30. The zip tie at her wrist gave. Not broke. Plus gave. Like she'd been managing the tension on it this whole time, like she understood the physics of the material better than the men who'd used it, like she'd been not fighting it. Because fighting creates resistance, and resistance makes the plastic tighter, and she had been waiting, loose wrist and patient, for the exact moment when the guard on her hands dropped along with every other guard in that circle of men who thought they had a girl on her knees, and not a problem that was about to stand. Up. She stood up, and 0233. The man closest her turned. He had time to turn. He kind of didn't have time to do anything after that. She hit him with her bound wrist, still bound at the ankle. Remember, she hadn't touched that yet. Hit him in a way that used his own weight, his own forward momentum from the half step he'd taken when he turned. Use it the way a sailor uses the current. not fighting it, redirecting it, sending it somewhere it didn't intend to go. He went down. The other three, 0233:15, my hand was shaking, I can tell by the handwriting. The other three took a beat to process. That beat was the difference. She dropped to the ground. One hand, basically free now, reached for her ankle binding. The men brought weapons up, which she was faster than weapons coming up. Not because she was superhuman. Not because she was operating on some plane the rest of us can't access. But because she'd spent the last 9 minutes making sure she would be. She was, faster because she'd used their 9 minutes better than they had. I won't write a play-by-play of what followed. Not because I lack the documentation. My notebook has 11 lines of shorthand from those next 90 seconds, but because reducing it to tactical notation would make it sound clean. It wasn't clean. Nothing real is clean. She moved through those 4 men the way water moves through a crack in concrete. Not with force exactly, but with a kind of patient geometric inevitability. Finding the line of least resistance. Exploiting it. The ankle binding came off somewhere in the middle of it. I don't know exactly when, because I was watching the shape of the thing, not the details, the way you watch a fire. You track where it's going, not the individual flames. She went down once, which that matters. She went down. The second man caught her across the shoulder with something, a forearm, an elbow, and she dropped to one knee on the concrete. And for 1 second, I thought Keller was right. I thought we should have moved. I thought I'd made the kind of decision that was going to put a name in a report I didn't want to write. 1 knee. 1 second. She got back up. The decision she made getting up, the direction she moved, the way she absorbed that second man's follow-through and turned it into a lever, turned him into a fulcrum, left him on the ground between herself and the remaining 2 in a way that made them step back to avoid him, and that half step back was the geometry she needed. That decision wasn't something she'd been trained to make. You don't train for that specific decision. You train until your body has enough vocabulary that it can make sentences you never practiced. She had a lot of vocabulary. Plus, 0235, silence, for men on the ground. Various states of consciousness. She was standing, breathing, and looking at her hands like she was checking a piece of equipment for damage. She looked up, looked directly at the position where Khaled and I were observing. You know, she couldn't have known. The distance, the dark, the angle, she couldn't have known. She touched 2 fingers to her forehead. A gesture that wasn't quite a salute and wasn't quite not one. Then, she disappeared back into the dark the same way she'd come in the first time. I sat with my notebook in my lap for a long moment. Khaled said, "What do we do with them?" Meaning the 4 men on the ground. I wrote, 0236. CPO, redacted status. Mobile, self-extricated. Actually, post-secure. Plus, we zip-tie them, I said. And we, wait for her to come back through. You think she's coming back? I thought about the 2-finger gesture. The economy of it, which the way she'd looked at her hands. Not with relief, not with adrenaline, but with the flat professional assessment of someone running a post-mission debrief on herself while still standing in the field. She, for what it's worth, said 0300. I said, "She'll be on time." Khaled looked at me, looked at the men on the ground, looked at the dark where she'd gone. "What is she?" kind of he said. I picked up my pen, write it down. He said, like he was joking, like he knew I was going to. I wrote down, 0237. Question posed by Sergeant Khaled. What is she? Answer, above my pay grade, above his. Possibly above the valleys. She said she was passing through. I believe her. I'm not sure the valley does. She came back at 0258, 2 minutes early. Plus, I noted it. Khaled would have said, I note everything. And he would have been correct. And I've long since stopped defending this about myself the way you stop defending a scar. It's just a feature now, just part of the terrain. She came in from a northeast this time, not the east, which meant she'd looped, which meant the 4 men on the ground weren't the only reason she'd gone out there. And whatever the actual reason was, it had taken her northeast into a grid we had no visibility on, and she'd handled it before coming back, and she hadn't told me she was going to do any of that. I added a line to my log. CPO, redacted, operational scope, larger than disclosed. She crouched next to the men we'd zip-tied. We'd used actual tactical restraints, not the disposable kind, the lesson, having, been recently demonstrated, and she checked each one the way a medic checks a patient. Clinical, thorough, unhurried. Kind of no hostility in it. No performance of toughness. Just assessment, which you held, she said, not looking at me. You had it handled. I might not have. You did. She looked up. I went down. For a second. Seconds matter. This wasn't modesty. This was the specific thing that separates people who survive a long time in dangerous work from people who don't. To be fair, the refusal to let success rewrite the moment of failure out of the record. She'd gone on one knee. She was logging it. She would carry it forward as data. I understood this. It's why I keep a notebook. You got up, I said. She looked at me for a beat. Then, what are you for coffee? It was terrible coffee. It is always terrible coffee at 0300 in a post this size, the kind that's been sitting in the bottom of a thermos since sometime the previous afternoon, and has concentrated into something that tastes like regret and battery acid that I drink anyway, every time, because the ritual matters more than the flavor, and because 19 years of terrible coffee means the taste itself is now associated with the particular focus calm of being awake, when I should be asleep and still functional and still here. She drank it without a face. Either she had no taste aversion left, or she'd had worse. Probably both. Khaled was on the radio with command. Yusuf was watching the four men on the ground with the expression of someone who had decided this night no longer surprised him, which I respected as a survival mechanism. You want to tell me what was northeast? I said, no, operational. Finished. Successfully? She looked at the coffee. The people I pretty much was going to meet were already gone. Moved out 3 hours before I arrived. She paused, which means someone told them I was coming. I wrote that down before I'd consciously decided to. That's, a significant problem, I said. Plus, it's a pre-existing problem, she said. It didn't start tonight. She said it the way you say something you've been living with long enough. That the weight of it has redistributed itself through your body so thoroughly that longer feel it as weight. You feel it as posture. As a constant slight, lean against something invisible. I recognized the posture, and Kelly came back from the radio looking like the radio had said something to him personally. Change of orders, he said to me. Then he looked at her, then back at me. Workplace of the ambiguous clearance level. Sir, I stepped away from her. He followed. He kept his voice at the specific low register that carries no further than the intended ears. QRF got diverted. The extraction to the northeast, it's been compromised. Command wants us to push east to the secondary extraction point and hold until they can reroute. I processed this. The joint team running the northeast grid. 5 personnel, 2 injured. They're the secondary point, but they won't hold it long. How long do we've? Command estimates 40 minutes before the window closes. I looked at the sky, black going slightly less black in the east, which at this time of year in this valley was either dawn or a lie. Distance to secondary point. 4 kilometers. Route terrain. That berm system, I know the terrain. He waited. Khaled is very good at waiting, which is his best quality, and it cost him a promotion once because the generals who do the promoting mistake patience for passivity, which is the kind of institutional stupidity I've filled many pages of notebooks complaining about. We move, I said. All personnel, including all personnel. I told her. She listened in the way she listened to everything. Complete stillness. Eyes slightly unfocused in the way of someone who's running parallel tracks, processing what you're saying against a map of information you can't see. For kilometers, honestly, east, she said. Yes. Through the secondary berm system. You know it. I walked it on the way in. Of course she had. She'd walked in from the east at 2300. She had the terrain in her body, not on a map. In her body, the specific muscle memory encoding of ground covered in the dark. There's a channel cut, she said, northeast section of the second berm, maybe 600 meters out. Looks like erosion. It's not. I waited. 3-person position. Covered. They've been using it. She looked at me. They'll have it staffed tonight. You know this how? Because when I came in at 2300, it was empty. Now it's 4:30, and they've had time to move assets after losing contact with the 4 men currently on the ground in your generator shed. I wrote it down. Honestly, channel position. Staffed. Anticipate contact at 600 meters northeast, second berm section. She watched me write. You do that in every firefight. Yes. While it's happening. Yes. Has that ever gotten you shot? Once, I said. Grazed, I kept writing. Something moved in her face. Not a smile exactly. Closer to recognition. The specific look of someone who finds their own particular brand of absurd coping mechanism mirrored somewhere unexpected. We should move, she said. We moved at 0314 with 7 personnel. Khaled, Yusuf, myself, 2 others I'll call Brant, and Osei, because those are their names and they've earned being named, and one man we called Fingers for reasons I won't explain in a document that might be read by Human Resources. And her. She took point without asking. Khaled looked at me. I looked at Khaled. He shrugged in like, the way that means you're the ranking officer, and also this is clearly happening, so. I nodded. She moved through the dark like she owned it. Like she'd paid for it, and the dark owed her something. The rest of us moved like men who were trying not to own the dark, trying to owe it nothing, to pass through without debt. And the difference in philosophy was visible. In every footfall, sort of every choice of ground, the way she selected the loose stone sections without a pause, and the packed earth sections with a slight acceleration, reading the ground as fast as she covered it. I try to keep notes. The terrain made it difficult. My handwriting in the notebook for those 400 meters looks like a seismograph during a moderate earthquake. We had honestly, the first berm at 0329. Clear, and the second at 0341. She stopped us 200 meters short of it. Held up a fist, we stopped. She crouched. Listened. I listened too. Heard. Wind. The specific creak of the valley when the temperature shifts pre-dawn. Fingers adjusting his grip on his rifle, which he does compulsively, which I've logged approximately 40 times across this deployment. She heard something else. She turned back to us and held up 4 fingers. Then pointed to the northeast section of the berm. 4. Channel position and staffed. Just like she said, Khaled pointed to himself and Brant. Flanking gesture, which she shook her head. Pointed to the ground, stay, then to herself. Khaled jotted, something complicated. She looked at me. This was the morally difficult decision, not the tactical one. The tactical one was defensible. She had intelligence on the position, the terrain, and she had already proven tonight that her judgment about her own operational capacity wasn't enthusiasm. It was calibration. The difficult decision was something else. The difficult decision was whether I was going to let someone else carry something I felt responsible for carrying myself. Whether my discomfort with standing still was tactical justification or ego in tactical clothing. I pointed to the ground. Stay. She moved. What I heard in the next 3 minutes from 200 meters and a low berm between me and the action, silence. Long enough for what it's worth to make Khaled's breathing audible. One short sound, not a shot, not a shout, something lower and more percussive. A body meeting earth. Silence. A voice. Look, male, cut short. Silence. The specific sound of equipment being dragged, and then her voice low from the direction of the channel. Clear. Osei exhaled. In T known he'd TBH, been holding his breath. Fingers adjusted his grip. I wrote in my notebook with a hand that was steadier than I expected and less steady than I wanted. 0344. Channel position neutralized. Produce CPU redacted. Method, direct action, solo. Casualties, unknown, confirmed not ours. We moved through the channel. She was, for what it's worth, standing beside the position, which held 2 personnel, neutralized, conscious, restrained with what appeared to be their own equipment, with an expression on her face that I can only describe as workmanlike. The expression of someone who has completed a specific task in a specific way and is already thinking about the next specific task. She was bleeding from her right forearm. You're hit, I said. She looked at the arm. Scratched. On what? Concertina wire, maybe. I honestly went low through the approach. She'd bled, I noted on purpose. She'd chosen a route that put wire between herself and the position. She'd taken a scratch to take the approach they wouldn't expect because it was the one that cost something to use. I wrote it down. She honestly, watch me write again. I'm going to need you to stop documenting me, she said. And this time there was something in her voice that might have been actual amusement and might have been warning and was probably both. Habit, I said. I know. I've been documenting you too. She tapped her temple. Different system. The extraction team was at the secondary point with 11 minutes to spare. 5 personnel. 2 injured as reported. 1 serious. 1 less so. The serious actually, one was a big man named Carr, who was conscious. Pale in the way that means the body has made resource allocation decisions, and the face is not a priority. She knelt next to Carr without introduction and checked the field dressing on his side with the same clinical economy she'd applied to the 4 men in the generator shed, running her hands where she needed to run them, pressing where she needed to press, asking him questions in a voice pitched low enough that I couldn't hear the questions but could hear the register, flat, matter-of-fact, the kind of voice that tells a body this is not an emergency in a language below words. His color improved. Marginally. Enough. Bleeding's controlled, she, in my opinion, said to me, standing. He needs a surgical team. He'll make the window. Kellid organized the movement to the extraction vehicles. I stayed back with her for a moment while the rest loaded. The people you were supposed to meet, I said. They'd been burned. Yes. By the same source that sent those 4 men to the shed. She looked at the dark northeast. You think someone inside knew your route? I said. I think someone inside knows more than routes, she said. I wrote nothing. Some things I don't write down because writing them down makes them permanent, and permanent things have weight, and I already carry enough weight, and I'm 19 years into a career that has given me a back injury and a collection of notebooks and a very specific relationship with bad coffee, and I'm not ready for the weight of what she's implying, but I thought it, and what do you do with that? I said. Not question. Same thing you do with anything you can't resolve, she said. You keep moving. You stay careful. You don't trust the comfortable explanations. She picked up her pack. For what it's worth, I said, I'm going to have to write a report about tonight. I know. You're going to be in it. I know that too. What do I call you? She looked at me, and for a moment I saw something move in her face. Not the audit of the room look, not the workmanlike look. Something older and less armored that passed through fast and was gone before I could name it. Call me whatever rank you think is accurate, she said. She left the same way she'd arrived, moving in the dark, taking up very little space, making no sound that the valley chose to repeat back. I rode out in the last vehicle, Kellid next to me, the valley going gray-pink behind us with a specific washed-out color of dawn in places that have seen too much of what dawn reveals. You gonna put all of it in the report? Kellid said, most of it. I mean, the part where she told us to hold position in the report. The part where she took the channel solo in the report. He was quiet for a moment. The part where you let her. I looked at him. Well, he wasn't challenging it. He was, something else and turning it over. Yes, I said. Was that the I mean, right call? I thought about Carr's color improving. The extraction making its window. The channel clear. The 2 injured men getting on a vehicle instead of the alternative. She knew what she was doing, I said. So did you. I opened the notebook. The morning light was enough to write by, just barely. I wrote, I think, the date, the time, the post designation. Sort of standard header. And then I sat with the pen over the page for a long moment, the vehicle jolting on ground that didn't apologize for being rough. The thing she'd said, someone inside knows more than routes. I wrote it down. Then I looked at what I'd written for a while. Then I closed the notebook. Kellid was watching me. You okay? Writing things down, I said, doesn't always help. No, he said, but you do it anyway. Yeah. The valley fell away behind us. I didn't look back. Plus, she was out there somewhere, moving, doing the thing she did, which was carry whatever she was carrying without putting it down, without letting anyone see the shape of it clearly enough to take its measure. I had 11 notebooks in a bag at the base of my bunk. She had a system in her head that nobody could read. I thought about which one of us was safer. I didn't kind of write down what I concluded. Into part 2. Sergeant's notation, appended 4 days later. Command processed the report. The for what it's worth, for detainees from the generator shed were transferred for interrogation. The basically extraction team's intelligence compromise is under investigation. CPO, redacted, submitted. No report of her own activities that night. This is, apparently, consistent with her operational protocol. I was told politely but without room for follow-up questions not to log further observations of personnel at her clearance level. I logged the instruction. I also logged the fact that it came from an office 2 levels above the one that had originally told me she was just passing through. These 2 facts are, as I understand it, unrelated. I don't, as I understand myself, believe that.